Good morning, everyone. Happy to have you with us today. I'm subbing in for Connor Everts and Dee Zink, our co-chairs who have other obligations today. We want to thank everyone who serves on our steering committee. Next slide, Gary, please. We have we have great representation on the steering committee, and we always want to take a moment to thank everyone who spends the time to think up and to find speakers and to get these meetings and great topics in front of you. Okay. We know that most of you are very familiar with using Zoom by now and webinars. But I'll just quickly say, if you have any technical difficulties, use the chat feature to communicate with us. Our format today is 60 minutes of presentations, and then after that we go to our dialogue, or what we call our Q&A. And for that, you'll see at the bottom of your screen the Q&A function. I'll talk a little more about that, but that's how you'll ask your questions for a dialogue session. Keep your audio muted. If you have poor connection, take a look at that line. There's a suggestion. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A there. So just press that, and then you have the ability to type in your question, and I'll be doing the Q&A at the end of the 60 minutes of presentations. Great. We have wonderful speakers today. I'd like to give you a brief introduction. Paul Rochelle, you see on your left there, works for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. He's the Water Quality Section Manager. Paul's responsibilities are and the whole water section, are to ensure compliance with all drinking water monitoring and treatment regulations, protecting source water quality, and developing solutions to emerging water quality challenges. Today, among other things, Paul's going to talk about Met's recent assessment of potential climate change impacts on water quality. Mark Gold is the Director of Water Scarcity Solutions at NRDC. He focuses on integrated water management issues. Many of you know that from 2019 to 2022, Mark was the Executive Director of the Ocean Protection Council and Deputy Secretary for Ocean and Coastal Policy for the California Natural Resources Agency. Mark's going to speak on climate change and ocean acidification and its nexus to water reuse, and also speak on stream and river water quality issues. Stephen Tucker is the General Manager of the Water Replenishment District. He has over 34 years of experience and now oversees MRD's, the Water Replenishment District's PFAS remediation program, the brackish groundwater remediation program, and the critical, very important replenishment and seawater intrusion barrier operations. He's going to speak on efforts to control and treat brackish water contamination along the coast. And so, without further ado, Dr. Paul Rochelle is going to be our first speaker. Paul?
Thank you, Kathy. Share my screen. Can I get an okay that you can see it?
I can see it. Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give a slightly longer introduction than I would normally do because I've got a story I want to tell. There's no pictures with the story, so it's going to stick on this slide for a couple of minutes. I've just returned from a long weekend at the coast around Santa Cruz and Monterey. It was a great couple of days, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the area. the spectacular scenery, the redwood forests, the white sand beaches, cypress groves along the coast, deer everywhere, sea lions playing in crystal clear water along the Monterey coast. It's a big slice of paradise. But as I was crisscrossing the San Lorenzo River in Santa Cruz and driving through Watsonville, I was reminded of the massive floods that hit the area during the Parade of Atmospheric Rivers earlier this year. And then driving up the coast above Davenport, we saw countless black skeletons in Big Basin Redwood State Park, which was scorched by fire in 2020, burning 90%, 97%, or 85,000 acres of the forest. So while both of these disasters may have happened without any climate change, they are reminders and forewarners of what we might be seeing more frequently because of climate change. Now, like most responsible organizations, the Metropolitan Water District is planning for climate change by making sure we're better prepared for changes in water quality and minimizing our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. And we're all getting familiar with the term weather whiplash. So there's no water, there's too much water, it's never going to rain again, will it ever stop raining? But the climate change story isn't just about water quality, or isn't just about water quantity. The quality of whatever water we have is going to be affected too. So my focus this morning is on the potential impacts of climate change on the quality of water, specifically our drinking water. My slides aren't advancing as fast as they should. I manage the water quality section at Metropolitan, and it's our job to make sure the drinking water we produce is safe and meets all state and federal regulatory standards, which we do by testing about 70,000 samples per year for a wide variety of constituents and potential contaminants. We monitor our source waters and our treated water from our vast distribution system. We also conduct applied research on a wide range of water quality issues and contaminants. Metropolitan is a water importer with two primary sources, the Sacramento River, San Joaquin Delta to the north and the Colorado River to the east. And this water is brought into our region by two aqueducts, the State Water Project and the Colorado River Aqueduct. And we tend to think of these regional lakes over there on the right-hand side as our source waters. But when we're talking about climate change impacts, anything that happens anywhere within the vast areas of these water systems can have an impact. The white outline there in the background, that marks the boundary of the Colorado River watershed. And the diagram is approximately to scale. It really is that big. So within these sources of water, there are a variety of issues and contaminants that we need to pay attention to. Elevated salinity in the form of dissolved solids and minerals is problematic in the Colorado River, while organic matter that can be precursors to regulated disinfection byproducts is more of an issue in the State Water Project. And then various metal and organic compounds are problematic in some waters, and constituents of emerging concern are things like PFAS and microplastics, things that we're starting to hear about, and the as yet unrecognized contaminants that may end up in our water at some point. In 2008, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change concluded that we will see higher water temperatures and more extremes of floods and droughts will affect water quality and exacerbate many forms of water pollution that we already see. So increased sediments and nutrients, dissolved organic carbon, pathogens, pesticides, salts, as well as thermal pollution. And there's been well over 500 publications that describe and predict the impact of climate change on water quality. And the conclusions all fall generally along the same lines. And not a single one of them concludes that climate change will be good for water quality. And much of this information has been synthesized into a report by Seyum Grebamariam, who is a principal limnologist here at Metropolitan. And much of what I'm going to be talking about now for the rest of the talk comes out of that assessment and that review of the scientific literature that SAOM has done. And as you might expect, economic damages are expected to be quite high as a result of water quality deterioration in the coming years. So how does climate impact water quality? On a very high level scale, it disrupts the hydrogeological processes and alters the rate of biogeochemical processes. So we can see salt intrusion into fresh water because of rising sea levels and increased flow of undesirable materials into water bodies. And the impacts will vary depending on the type of water body and the size and characteristics of the water body and the watersheds that serve them. Here in California, we can expect to see a big increase in the frequency and severity of storms, which will significantly impact the State Water Project with increased sediment, nutrient and pollutant mobilization, which all make water treatment more challenging. The storms last winter turned Castaic Lake brown and caused a huge turbidity spike in water leaving the lake. That turbidity hit one of our treatment plants, and we had to make some quite extreme treatment modifications to ensure that we were still producing high quality drinking water. And as you can see there in the picture of the treatment plant in the middle bottom, the brown turbidity was successfully removed during the treatment process. But we did have to make some quite dramatic increase or changes in the treatment process to deal with that record-setting turbidity. Now, abundant water can sometimes bring another problem, and that is reduced alkalinity. Alkalinity is measured as calcium carbonate, and while too much can be a problem, so can too little. With all the rain we had earlier in the year, and then snow melting and turning to runoff into the State Water Project, we saw a significant reduction in alkalinity coming down into Southern California, into our region and hitting our treatment plants. While we can treat low alkalinity water, the changes we make can result in corrosion issues in the treated water if not carefully managed. On the opposite side of the spectrum from extreme water, in between all that rain, we're also expecting to see more frequent and longer periods of drought and more and bigger wildfires, like the one I mentioned that burned the Big Basin redwoods. And as water bodies are drawn down because of drought, the likelihood of increased salinization and oxygen depletion, or anoxia, increases. But then when it does rain after a prolonged dry spell, we see runoff from burned areas introducing contaminants into waterways. But it gets worse than just atmospheric rivers and drought. When the weather swings from one extreme to the other, so-called climate or weather whiplash, the effects are more pronounced than when either of those occur alone. And so that means we'll see even more unwanted material washing off land into our waterways. And this synergy of wet-dry cycles means we could be seeing up to 15 times as many multi-year severe droughts by the end of this century. If the predictions hold up, we can expect to see quite extreme increases in water temperature, as indicated by the figures in the first couple of lines on this slide. Warmer water exacerbates all of the water quality problems, including increased growth of problematic cyanobacteria and algae in source waters, oxygen depletion, increased concentrations of metals and sulfides. Also, warmer water passing through our treatment plants can make it more challenging to maintain the quality of the treated water in the distribution system. We can have challenges maintaining a good disinfectant residual and can see conditions favoring increased nitrification in distribution systems because of that warmer water. I've mentioned nutrients a few times, which really means phosphorus and nitrogen. but also some organic carbon. The State Water Project and the Colorado River already have issues with nutrient loading, and this is expected to get a lot worse over the next 70 years. More nutrients means more green water from cyanobacterial blooms. It means more algae that can clog filters at our treatment plants, increased pH, faster oxygen depletion in deep waters, and more metals and sulfide being mobilized into the water. And there's a synergy between temperature and nutrients such that the impacts are compounded. We seem to be hearing about cyanobacterial blooms more frequently with lake closures because of cyanotoxins. And we already have to take measures to aerate source water lakes to improve dissolved oxygen levels. And accelerated oxygen depletion means more extreme measures will be needed in the future. So images like this and headlines and warning signs might become more frequent. Just yesterday, the Department of Water Resources here in California issued a cyanotoxin warning for Castaic Lake, there on the right-hand side, advising people to avoid contact with the water. And that's because of an increase in cyanobacterial blooms and cyanotoxins in the lake. Fortunately, water is drawn from deep in the lake as a source for drinking water, so it's not impacted by the cyanobacterial bloom. So what do we see if we look into the crystal ball? If the predictions hold up, it's more weather whiplash and potential increases in all of the water quality issues that I've mentioned. More contaminants, more pathogens, more turbidity, more overall water quality challenges. Treating drinking water to drinking water standards might become even more challenging than it already is, because treating for one issue might not address others or might create new problems. So, for example, treating for low alkalinity might impact our ability to handle turbidity. With cyanotoxins typically in the surface waters of a lake, we might want to use deeper water, but if the deep water has got low oxygen and increased metals and sulfides, then we don't want to use that either. I'm not going to go through all of them, but in general, while having lots of water falling out of the sky is a good thing from a water supply perspective, it isn't always a good thing from a treatment perspective. And while within reason we can remove and treat most contaminants, there is a cost associated with that treatment. And sometimes that cost is just not manageable. So what can water utilities do? What actions can be taken to prepare and manage the increased challenges we're going to see as a result of climate change? Well, obviously, we have to plan for it and identify those adaptation measures. We need to diversify the portfolio of water resources we have to draw on, so that if one becomes unusable, we do have alternative supplies for our treatment processes. And we'll need to optimize our water treatment processes beyond where we already have. The treatment of water and the distribution of water, of treated drinking water, has to be considered, or the considerations that have to be taken include things like more extreme variability in weather patterns. We have to be able to treat anoxic water, low alkalinity water, turbid water, water that's contaminated by taste and odor compounds, or the cyanotoxins that I've mentioned, produced by superblooms of cyanobacteria. We have to have strategies for managing nitrification and loss of disinfectant residual in the distribution system because of warmer water. Most treatment plants are conventional treatment plants, and they do a very good job. But moving forward, we might have to look at modifying or building new treatment plants with alternative types of treatment, additional types of treatment, and more advanced treatment to handle these various challenges that may be coming in the future due to climate change. And since I do manage the water quality section and we are responsible for all of Metropolitan's monitoring, some of the changes that we'll be looking at implementing in the future are such things as automated water quality sensors, so that we have a more real-time monitoring of both our source water lakes and of water in our treated water distribution system. We already use remote sensing to monitor and detect cyanobacterial blooms in lakes, using satellites in space and floating stations on the lakes. Simple things we might have to do, though, if climate change, if many of the predictions become a reality, are simply things like extending boat ramps so that we can still get into our reservoirs when the water level is low. And overall, we're looking to upgrade our testing facilities to accommodate more samples and emerging pollutants with faster turnaround times, so that we can respond quicker when we do see these types of issues. And there I will stop. And I think I am now going to hand it over to Stephen Tucker from the Water Replenishment District.
Thank you, Paul. Let me pull my slides up here. And can you all see my slides?
Yes, yes, we can.
Not in presentation view, though, it's your view.
Okay, let me see if I can get it in presentation view. Stop sharing this for a second. For some reason, my slides won't go into presentation mode.
It might be better to share your entire screen.
Okay. I apologize for this. Be try to okay, how's that?
Looks good here.
Okay, great. Apologize for that the difficulty. Stefan Tucker, General Manager of the Water Replenishment District. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing at the Water Replenishment District to combat some of the climate change issues that are happening in California, and to combat against some of the water quality issues we're having with our groundwater. Just to give you a little bit more about the Water Replenishment District. We are have a service area that starts just south of the 10 freeway and the 60 freeway in southern Los Angeles County. And as you can see on the screen, the area outlined in the dark blue is our service area, with Orange County to the east of us, bordered on the west and south by the Pacific Ocean. And then, as I said, just south of the 10 freeway and the 60 freeway is our northern boundaries. We're divided up into 5 divisions. You can see the division lines drawn there, which are headed up by 5 elected officials for each one of those districts. Our service area covers about 420 square miles and services 43 cities with about 4 million residents that we serve. Currently, we have active about 300 wells that are pumping from our groundwater aquifers, spread out throughout the Central Basin and West Coast Basin. And as you can see on the right of the screen, those wells will extend down through a number of different aquifers, having slots or baffles to allow the water to come into the well shaft. And as the water comes in through the well shaft from those aquifers, the water purveyors will pump it out and treat it or chlorinate it and serve it to the customers in their particular service areas. We have folks that draw from our groundwater basins that are cities, municipal water companies, large industries such as oil companies, and private water companies as well. So number of different types of users of the groundwater in our groundwater basin. Water Replenishment District, we're responsible for replenishing the groundwater, and most of that is done up in the Montebello forebay, and some is done at our barrier protection areas. Then we monitor both the level and the quality of the water. We have about 300 nested wells that we do that monitoring throughout our service area. We participate in a number of different cleanup projects, from PFAS to manganese to perchlorate and brackish groundwater as well in our service areas. We've got 2 recycling plants that we'll talk about in a minute, and we use a good amount of recycled water to help replenish our groundwater basins in Southern California. We also do a fair amount of modeling of the basin to find out, both from a contamination plume modeling as well as where the groundwater actually is and the levels of that groundwater and how it's flowing. And then we also act as a regional water master for our entire service area, which keeps an account of who's pumping and how much they're pumping, and make sure they're staying within their rights, so we're not over pumping the basin. As we said, we've got actually 3 treatment facilities. We've got the Albert Robles facility in Pico Rivera, we've got the Leo J. Vanderlands facility in Long Beach, and both those are advanced water treatment facilities. And then we got the Goldsworthy facility in Torrance, where that is actually desalting brackish water that is trapped in a plume underneath the city of Torrance and other South Bay cities. And one of our newest treatment plants that has just come online is a smaller treatment plant in the Los Angeles forebay area, where we're treating perchlorate that is in the Los Angeles forebay area. So as you can see from this map, again, this is our service area. The yellow dots are where we actually do injection of advanced treated water, and in some cases surface water that's imported, in order to keep seawater intrusion from contaminating our groundwater basins. We do that in 3 different areas. We do it in the West Coast area, as you can see off toward the west of our service area. Then we do it down in the harbor area. We call that our Dominguez Gap barrier. And we take advanced treated water from the Terminal Island treatment plant and inject it in that area. And then over to the lower right-hand side is the Alamitos barrier, where we take water, advanced treated water from our Leo J. Vanderlands plant, inject it there, all to keep the seawater from intruding in and contaminating the groundwater basins that we service and manage. And then you can see up the blue circle is where we do most of our replenishment. Up in the Rio Hondo and San Gabriel spreading grounds up in the Pico Rivera area is where most of the water goes in for replenishment purposes. And that water comes down out of the San Gabriel Mountains and through our partnership with the LA County Flood Control. That water is then released into those basins, percolates into the groundwater basins, and flows down through both the central and ultimately the West Coast groundwater basins. We've got a few sources of water in Southern California as far as replenishing our groundwater. There's stormwater. Again, that flows in, and we bring that in through the Whittier Narrows and into the groundwater basins, spreading grounds, as I said, up in the Montebello Forebay in the Pico Rivera area. We've got imported water that we purchase through either West Basin Municipal Water District or Central Basin Municipal Water District. And we will replenish water that way, although we haven't had to do that in a number of years, and I'll tell you why in just a few minutes. But we also use some imported water to supplement our seawater barrier intrusions areas. And we also use tertiary treated water that we use to send to the Montebello Forebay spreading grounds, and then advanced treated water that we also send to the Montebello area Forebay, as well as the various barriers that we use for seawater intrusion. So, imported water is largely snowmelt that's been transported from the various watersheds. And as Paul said earlier, the Metropolitan Water District imports water from both the State Water Project and the Colorado River, but we also have water coming into the area from the Los Angeles Aqueduct, and that's imported by the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Increasingly, we are taking more and more advantage of the local water supplies from stormwater and advanced treated and tertiary treated recycled water. And we're using increasingly more of that type of water to replenish our groundwater basins. So climate forecast predicts more rainfall than snowfall in the coming years. And that's a little problematic for us in that we depend on that stormwater, that snowmelt, to store that water. And as it melts over time, we send it down through the aqueducts into our basins. So if we have more rainwater than snowfall coming down, that water comes down a lot quicker than we have areas to store it in Southern California. So that could be a bit problematic for us. Last year, as you know, was a wet year for us, and we had record stormwater capture. In 22-23 water year, we were able to capture 76 billion gallons of stormwater. And that is the largest amount that we have on record. So that helped us recover from an extreme drought. Of course, we know we can't count on that every year. So we have to have methodologies to store the water that is that comes down so that we can use it in subsequent years in our basin. Over the years, when the Water Replenishment District was first came into being in the 1960s, all of the water we used for replenishment was imported water purchased from the Metropolitan Water District. As you can see over the years, as the Whittier Narrows advanced water treatment plant came online, or the tertiary treatment plant came online, more and more recycled water was used for replenishment, to the point where in 2019, our Albert Robles Center came online, and we were able to use 100% recycled water for replenishment purposes, and we have not had to have to use imported water for replenishment purposes in the past 4 years. Came close to ordering some water from Metropolitan Water District last year, but along came the number of atmospheric rivers, so we got plenty of storm water. So we still have not had to use imported water for the purposes of replenishment in our Montebello Fort Bank. Right now, because of all of the efforts, about 50% of the water used in our service area is groundwater, and about 50% of the water comes from imported water. And we're still working through our Win for All program, Water Independence Now for All program, to try to increase that percentage to more than 50%, so that we are less dependent on imported water moving forward, and have a more sustainable water supply for the Southern California area. So as you can see, we have plenty of storage area available in our service area. The purple area shows that the current level of pumping in our area, and the blue area shows that there's still a lot of unused rights for pumping in the West Coast Basin and the Central Basin. And then we still have tons of storage in the groundwater basins, so that we could, in wet years, we could use a lot of that water that's coming down and stored in our basins for subsequent dry years that we know are coming. Currently, in both basins, we have a total of about 450,000 acre-feet of water that's available for use. This is just a depiction of how we do our stormwater intrusion protection, where we inject water along the coast to keep the seawater from flowing in and contaminating our groundwater basin. We also have our Goldsworthy desalter right now that is drawing water from that saltwater plume, purifying that water, and actually serving it to the city of Torrance. That facility right now has a capability of serving about 5 million gallons a day. And we are in the process of expanding that facility to take it to about 10 million gallons a day of service to the city of Torrance. This is a look at what that saltwater plume looks like now. That's underneath the city of Torrance, the red area being the more concentrated area where the chlorides are most prevalent in the groundwater. So we are, like I said, doubling the size of our Goldsworthy desalter. We want to be able to pull out about 10 million gallons a day of that brackish water, desalt it, and serve it to the city of Torrance, and that will displace the amount of water that the city of Torrance has to use in serving their customers every day. So the ultimate goal is for particularly our basin is to go from that 50% that I showed you earlier to some number much higher than 50%, so that we're locally sustainable here in Southern California and a lot less dependent on imported water for the service of our area. And I think with that, I'm just about out of time. Got about 30 seconds left. And with my last 30 seconds, I'll turn it over to Mark so he can begin his presentation.
All right, thank you, Stefan. Let me try doing share screen. It's doing that. Hold on. How is that?
Looks good.
Perfect.
Looks good. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll launch into this. So I'm always here to provide something more controversial. So not a surprise there. It's a privilege to follow those two very, very interesting talks. A lot of ground that you covered in that. A little bit redundant, but not that much. And so let's just launch into it. All right, so on water reuse, which is really going to be a lot of my focus today, the goal that we have at NRDC is to try to move the West as close as possible to local water self-sufficiency. So that fits pretty well with the WRD talk, that's for sure. That means water reuse, stormwater capture and infiltration, sustainable groundwater management, more pumping and treating of contaminated aquifers, which we just heard about, brackish groundwater desal, which we heard about the Goldsworthy plant, and there's way more potential there than what that's doing. And of course, you know, the cheapest way to get there is conservation, but you really need all of this to get as close to self-sufficiency as possible. On the water reuse impacts, the thing I really want to focus on largely today, which I'm guessing this audience hasn't really heard that much about, is the potential exacerbation of ocean acidification and hypoxia impacts. If water reuse treatment trains that are chosen end up still discharging high pollutant loads of brine with nutrient loads. So nutrient reduction is really a huge part of that. I'll spend a lot less time, and I think Paul covered a lot of these very well, on the freshwater climate impacts, on high nutrient levels, obviously exacerbating low dissolved oxygen, eutrophication problems, increased algal cover, and harmful algal blooms, especially cyanobacteria. And Hansen, that whole issue up at Castaic was a great example of that. Also, just increased temperatures and reduced flows also cause a major issue. Think Lake Mead and record low levels and increased salinity because of evaporation, et cetera, as well. And then altogether, ecological and human health risk impacts. And then lastly, just related to the seawater intrusion issue is it's not going to get better. We've got sea level rise impacts coming soon here. We're starting to see them a little bit now, but they really pick up in the 2030s in pretty significance based on the modeling from the experts working in that field. All right, so influence of land-based inputs on ocean processes. We're talking about discharges from coastal sewage treatment plants, also urban runoff. Nutrient loads from urban runoff in the Southern California Bight, which is largely where the Met service area is, of course, is not that significant. In other areas where you have a lot more agriculture, you can get really high nutrient loads from runoff. But we have not seen that on the coast side, but obviously we do see that pretty significantly in our inland waters. And I'll touch upon that a little bit at the end. And you see some of the potential impacts there. All right. So where are your nutrients coming from? They come from the outfall, but you also, because we're in Southern California, we have generally lower temperature waters. We have upwelling in this part of the California current. And so that generally is a pretty significant process for nutrient loads. That's why you generally see large algal blooms. Not always, but generally more during late spring all the way through summer. Following upwelling events with a lot of sun, you end up getting big blooms. All right, so here's a couple of images to take a look at. This just gives you differences in temperature and ocean acidification over time. You have pictures to the right on this slide of pteropods, which are a planktonic mollusk type of snail. You've seen NOAA with a number of cruises. Nina Benarsik wrote a number of papers on this that were pretty groundbreaking. Found both shell dissolution impacts to pteropods, which are a huge food source, especially for salmonids in the ocean, but also Dungeness crab larvae, which are, right up there with market squid. They sort of go back and forth as the two most productive fisheries in the state of California. So we are seeing today impacts of ocean acidification on the physiology of important planktonic organisms. This goes to my former role in running the Ocean Protection Council. And this is sort of looking at the California ocean acidification and hypoxia milestones. I'm not going to go into these in detail. We don't have enough time, but just suffice it to say that the state, especially the OPC, working in conjunction with the State Water Resources Control Board and the Ocean Science Trust, has made ocean acidification a top priority and has funded literally millions and millions of dollars of research in this arena. Everything from modeling, which I'll get into in a minute, to actually what are the impacts that we're seeing in the environment directly right now. And also what can be done to somewhat mitigate those impacts. And that's the potential help of seagrass and kelp for that regard. All right, so what has happened? Well, the big investment, and it's really weird for me because this started with a proposal that I helped write when I was at UCLA. For those of you who don't know, I helped run the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability and then became Associate Vice Chancellor for Environment and Sustainability for UCLA. And so did that for about 7+ years between the two. And one of the things we did was got to work with Jim McWilliams and then Curtis Deutsch, who was there at UCLA. And we put together a proposal with the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project to the OPC to really start doing this coupled physical biogeochemical model for the entire West Coast. My role was just literally matchmaking, helping to put together the proposal, helping to write the proposal, and then standing out of the way and letting the people who really know what they're doing do the science. And so this has gone on now for over a decade. Has resulted in 24+ peer-reviewed publications at this point, in really some very highly viewed and respected journals. And so there's a lot that has occurred in doing this. As you can see from the image on the left, the big thing is that really high resolution in the Southern California Bight in doing that work. So this couples physical models with biogeochemical models to really try to get a better understanding of the impacts of nutrients as well as climate processes, with CO2 being absorbed, obviously at greenhouse gases, but CO2 in particular being absorbed by the ocean. We would be having ocean acidification already anyways because of the climate crisis. But to what degree are we exacerbating it with coastal anthropogenic sources? That's really what this research was all about. I'm going to have to admit, I was surprised, and not in a good way, where I thought the global processes were absolutely going to be dominant. And the reality is that the coastal anthropogenic processes really play a much, much more major role in what we're seeing on impacts of the Southern California Bight in particular than was originally hypothesized, including by myself. All right, so this is Southern California, and what do you see? 23 million people living within Bight watersheds, receiving a lot of discharges from both point and non-point sources. But by far the biggest nutrient sources are coming from ocean outfalls, and mostly from the big four, San Diego, Orange County, and 2 in LA County. All right, so the model runs by SCWRP, UCLA, and Princeton have indicated, so big thanks to them for their incredible work that they've been doing for the last decade, that we cannot dismiss the effect of land-based nutrients on seawater chemistry. So for the past 5 years, overall, a 100% increase in algal production along our coast, which is just enormous. And that's the prediction there. Triggering decline in pH and oxygen for a 4 to 6 month period in the summer. 98% of land-based nutrients are estimated to be from human sources. And overall, 25% of the Bight has an average habitat compression of 20%, up to 60% in some places, for up to 3 months per year in the late summer and early fall. So we're talking about impacts today. We're not talking about impacts in 2040, 2050, 2060. Those are only going to get worse. That work has not been done now. It's just started to get initiated on what the future holds for us. So the real focus is, what is the present doing? A lot of SQUIRT's work has also been looking at, what are the impacts to the organisms of concern? Who's most vulnerable here? And so that's pteropods, echinoderms, crabs, shrimp, lobster. And so they're great at bringing together experts from around the world to develop consensus on things like thresholds, where we start seeing impacts on aragonite saturation and impacts on marine organism physiology. Habitat squeeze, the habitat thickness issue. This is the compression issue. The big focus in the model was on pteropods and northern anchovies as representative species. And the anchovy impacts, as you can imagine, are in the dissolved oxygen area, something called the metabolic index. And then the impacts on pteropods would be things like shell dissolution and which we've already covered. All right, I'm going to skip this over time. And so this just is a visual demonstration on changes in algal biomass, as well as changes in oxygen. One of the things I really want to point out to everybody on the scale, which was also a big surprise, is that I think most of us were thinking that the phenomenon would be, the impacts would be much more close to shore. And to actually see impacts on ocean acidification, as well as on algal growth, as well as metabolic index, to see it on the other side of the Channel Islands, 50 miles offshore, is something that I think was really surprising to everybody. And so that just shows the currents and what occurs there is really quite concerning. The work that they're also working on is harmful algal blooms as well, but I haven't seen that work yet, and I don't think it's been made public yet. They're probably still in process working on it. So this goes to what we were talking about before on habitat compression. Look at the figure on the right, which is really compelling, is where you see the worst habitat compression, sort of in the northern San Diego County, Orange County area, where you see the dark red, really high percentage there. All right, so what does it mean? If you can swim like a fish, you can move somewhere else more suitable, but obviously that has impacts on energetics and those sorts of issues. But if you can't, things like zooplankton and benthos, bottom-dwelling critters, then you spend energy on dealing with stress, less on growth and reproduction, and as we've seen, you can have physiological impacts like shell dissolution, which are pretty horrible. There's a lot of work going on right now. OPC is funded. Implications of predicted effects on habitat capacity, on population level effects. That work has not been completed yet. And so that's sort of the next step, is to see how big the ecological harm is in a more complex way. The sorts of things that have been looked at on the solution side, I got to hurry on this, are that how do you reduce inorganic nitrogen coming from the POTWs, from the sewage treatment plants on the coast, from no reduction to 50% reduction and 85% reduction. We didn't go any more than that because that's readily what can be done with existing engineering processes. Turns out you can do a little bit more than that, but those were the thresholds that were chosen. And then also looking at reduction in outfall discharge volume from full discharge to 50% to 10% of present day levels. You can imagine 10%, that's getting you pretty much to full water recycling other than the brine. And so those are the scenarios that were looked at. It has not been completed yet, but in general, the models predict that reduced nitrogen loading improves seawater chemistry in suitable habitat area. So that would mean less habitat compression, less extreme areas with very low aragonite saturation, low pH, as well as very low DO. And so remember, that can be vertical or spatial horizontally. And then also reducing wastewater volume results in seawater chemistry and habitat declines to be patchier. So that goes to the same thing that I was talking about. So obviously a big motivation to be looking at nutrient reduction because of the impacts on ocean acidification and hypoxia. So what the heck does all this mean? Why is this person talking to us water supply folks about what the heck's going on in the ocean? Well, because there's massive investments in the transformation of coastal sewage treatment plants that are occurring right now. You know, we obviously the Pure Water Southern California project, Pure Water San Diego project. Everyone's using the Pure Water acronym except for City of LA, which is Operation Next. And so we need these reliable supplies ASAP. You know, so there's no question how critical these projects are. You know, they can provide us anywhere from 300, 400,000 plus acre feet per year of new reliable water in Southern California. But these decisions on what treatment trains that are actually going to be used are being made right now. And the last thing you want to do is build it out and then have to go back in and retrofit. That will cost a heck of a lot more than dealing with this upfront in the design component of it. So moving to advanced treatment while maintaining nutrient loads will greatly exacerbate OAH impacts, as I've demonstrated from the work that's been done previously. And advanced treatment must include nitrification and denitrification processes to reduce nutrient loads. But how much is enough? This is a really important question. Is the total inorganic nitrogen of 10 milligrams per liter enough? 7 milligrams per liter? Do we have to get all the way down to 5 milligrams per liter or 3 milligrams per liter or lower? Clearly, the lower the better based on the preliminary results so far. But I'm not going to pretend just because I work in an environmental group that I don't understand that cost is an issue, meaning the lower you get, obviously, the more expensive it is. So there has been experience in NDN being used for inland plants in this region, in the LA region in particular, for the last 20 years. And so that was more ammonia driven, but they did knock down total nitrogens to 10 and 5 or so in a lot of different treatment plants within the area. So it does show you it can be done, but the scale is much more difficult, much more expensive to do it for, you know, massive sewage treatment plants that are dealing with, you know, 200 MGD plus per day. All right, so other solutions, brine disposal. Can we keep the nutrient-laden brine out of receiving waters? Some desalination plants and wastewater treatment plants are actually mining the brine for minerals and nutrients are possible too. And then one of the things I didn't type up, but I really want to give props to us in an area to sort of think about is the Tyre project, which is the Terminal Island project. Hold on, I'm trying to find my notes here. Terminal Island Renewable Energy Project, which has been in place now for about a decade down in TI. And they inject very deep, like 4,500 feet deep, brine as well as biosolids from that facility. Now, that's not a huge facility. It's like a 15 MGD facility, but it's working like a champ. It's also producing methane. And so from the standpoint of capturing that methane and actually using it to power the plant, it's working there. So it's really interesting technology that's now been around for a while. And another way to sort of look at this is part of the equation is, do we want to do an NDN or do we need to do something like brine injection in places that pose absolutely no risk to human health or aquatic life? And then lastly, the State Water Board and the Ocean Protection Council are working on potential policy and regulatory requirements to reduce OAH impacts in coastal waters statewide. There was a workshop in March this year. Action could be late 24, 25, remains to be seen. But obviously, this is beyond an emerging issue. This is an emerged issue, especially on the ocean side of it. But from the standpoint of starting to get the water supply people heavily involved because of these climate crisis impacts, that has not really been a focus yet. And so I'm glad to give this talk here. Now, my last slide, if I recall correctly, is climate impacts on water quality in rivers and streams. I have a picture of good friend who hopefully some of you may have heard of, but the horrible news that happened with him is Mark Abramson just passed away about 2 weeks ago. This slide sort of in honor of him. Mark was somebody who was really looking at impacts climate impacts on water quality in rivers and streams his whole career in many, many different ways through the creation of Heal the Bay Stream Team program and running that for about a dozen plus years. And so issues that we've already heard about on temperature increases, reduction in flows, water supply, reduced precipitation and evaporation, combination of above exacerbates nutrient impacts on eutrophication, increased algal cover, low dissolved oxygen in receiving water, very big issue. Increasing frequency of harmful algal blooms, cyanobacteria on the freshwater side, incredibly toxic. And then obviously we've been seeing major increases in harmful algal blooms on the ocean side as well, and high levels of domoic acid posing all sorts of physiological problems and to marine mammals in particular. Major changes in stream ecology, so the macroinvertebrate ecology themselves, obviously, very warm waters, not good for any salmonids, is an example there. Increased salinity can be an issue for a lot of species as well. So I did want to emphasize again that issue of on the salt side, which is areas like Lake Mead as well as rivers and streams. When you really have increased evaporation, less flows coming into them, that you're going to end up having increased salinity, total dissolved solids in those waters, which can pose all sorts of impacts, not to mention making it more expensive for us to treat for drinking water purposes. And then the importance of nutrient reduction, water recycling plant discharges, and I gave the example of what has occurred within the LA region. On the coastal aquifer side, we have seawater intrusion issues, as we've already heard. They're only going to get exacerbated because of sea level rise. And so the importance of seawater intrusion barriers cannot be overemphasized. And we also have a huge importance on brackish water desalination. Great news from WRD on the capacity in a lot of those aquifers. We're clearly not utilizing the most that we can of those aquifers, and we can get even more capacity by greater brackish water desalination than what is occurring right now, which is relatively modest scale. And so that is it for me, and I'll pass it back to Kathy.
Great. Thank you very much, Stefan. Yes, wonderful presentation. Mark, thank you so much. And why don't we, if you could put the slides, Gary, back on to assist me in starting the Q&A. There we go. Great. We're going to move to the dialogue part of our meeting today. I urge any of you, all of you, to put questions forth. You, I believe, probably know how to do this. At the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A button. And so just press that. Next slide. And then add in your question. And I'm going to be monitoring the questions as they come in. And we will get to them. You also have the ability to upvote the questions. If you see a question there and you go, yes, that's one that I wanted to ask too, then just hit the thumbs up icon. And that helps me know that there's even more than one person asking that question. So great. Hope to see many of you using that Q&A button. Great. All right. So why don't we, as I wait for those questions to come in, let me start with a few of my own. Mark, our last speaker, you did a very, very good job of talking about all the things that can be done to reduce the acidification, to tamper down the exacerbation that's going on. If you were king, what would your priorities be? Where would you start? Where do you think you could get the biggest bang for the buck in helping with this problem?
Well, I mean, this is something I've been thinking about for the last decade, which is, one of the things and I think all of us on this panel have been at this for 30 plus years. So I think, when I first started, really trying to maximize water reuse was one of the biggest priorities that we had when I was at Heal the Bay, obviously Dorothy Green disciple and the like. But to get to the point where we're now seeing the coastal sewage treatment plants, the real big dischargers, doing conversions to water reuse, now's the time is to basically figure out how are we going to address the nitrification denitrification issue, and what's the best way to do it. From the standpoint of protection, reducing the impacts on ocean acidification and hypoxia, but also in the most cost-effective manner. And there's a lot of ways to get there. And so it means we need to start having those productive discussions, and doing that. So my wish, you made me, benevolent dictator for a day or whatever, is to be able to make that call. The reality is that my hope is that we make that call sooner rather than later. And because these decisions on building out these facilities are happening right now in real time. And so final designs have not been done at this point. And so there's just like everybody's talking about distribution systems and what's going to go on there. We need to do the same thing for treatment from the standpoint of nitrogen, and do that, as soon as possible, and work with the OPC and the State Water Resources Control Board in figuring out the best way to do it. I think the more we do it in an innovative way right now, it's going to help on what the future holds on the regulatory side. Just remember, in the Bay Area, nobody's doing any of this stuff. So this is something that's going to be brand spanking new to them. But we in Southern California have sort of been looking at this for a longer time.
Interesting. Good. Stefan, let me turn to you for a minute. You mentioned, I can't remember the number, but it seemed like a huge amount of water was captured this year. And when you say captured, does that mean that water actually went down into the ground? And what are your facilities to actually infuse that water into the groundwater basins?
Sure. So Los Angeles County Flood Control actually has several dams up in the San Gabriel, Santa Monica Mountains. So the water that comes down from the atmospheric rivers was captured behind those dams. And it's released at a rate that we can infiltrate that water into the groundwater basins. So, their primary role is flood control. So to the extent that they can hold that water back and give it to us at a rate that we can infiltrate it into the groundwater basins is great. We infiltrated a lot in our central basin. San Gabriel Basin also infiltrated quite a bit of water, as well as Hanson Dam area and the spreading grounds. They were all able to capture a lot of water. But just for the water replenishment districts area, we just updated this number a couple of days ago because we got a little bit more from Tropical Storm Hilary. We were able to infiltrate about 76 billion gallons of water, and that went directly into the groundwater aquifers.
That was your agency winning,
Yes.
Or the overall?
That was just my agency.
Just WRD.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
And
Kathy,
yes.
I just put something in the chat on that. So just so, first of all, amazing news, Stefan. That's like so impressive. That's a big research question that LA County Public Works and USGS are discussing, and they've both been doing research in this arena. And the ballpark estimate for LA County is roughly, and it's a ballpark, so it's going to get better over time, is 60% of stormwater infiltrated and made its way to aquifers, and the other 40% was lost to various different places.
Interesting. Thank you very much. I have a question from Richard Haskell. The question is the MWD Pure Water Program going in the right direction in terms of water reuse? I think that Mark, you might have a comment on this. Paul, you're with MWD. Perhaps either one of you could field this one.
Well, I'll take a first stab at it. Yes, it's going in the right direction. It's well, once it's built out to full scale, will be one of, if not the biggest water recycling plant there is. And so that certainly seems to be going in the right direction in terms of solidifying a local drought-proof supply, a regional supply of drinking water, makes us less dependent on the two imported supplies I was talking about, and therefore makes us less vulnerable to the kinds of impacts we see from climate change. It's not a solution in and of itself, but it's certainly a step in the right direction.
I echo what Paul said. I couldn't agree more. The exciting but daunting challenge in addition to, you know, building this out and really leading the way. I mean, it's not like there's a lot of direct potable reuse or plants that are out there right now globally. And so if you know, if some of this goes to direct potable reuse or is a combination of indirect potable reuse and DPR, that those things need to be worked out. The other thing that is also exciting and daunting is the need to have a collaborative partnership with City of Vallejo and Operation Next, so that we have a distribution system that can really integrate the recycled water coming from Hyperion and the Joint Water Pollution Control Plant. So that is a lot, but this is by far the most important water infrastructure project in my lifetime in Southern California. I can't think of anything more important.
Yes, and if I can put my 2 cents in, I got 3 responses to that question. It's yes, yes, and yes. It's going in the right direction. You know, from just the groundwater that's pumped in out of our service areas, it's about 200,000 acre feet per year. And that's about 48% of the water used in the WRD service area. From Operation Next and Pure Water Southern California, talking about reproducing or recycling and using about 400,000 acre feet of water per year. That's a lot of water. And we could be locally sustainable, given, you know, direct potable end use, reuse regulations and appropriate groundwater use. We could be totally sustainable in Southern California for many, many years to come. So it's definitely going in the right direction, in my opinion.
Great, great. We have a question that brings up the water quality issues in with the Tijuana River, and mentions that it's going to take a long time to build and expand water treatment plants on both sides of the border. The questioner asked, would it be helpful if the SCC WRP model could be extended to include seawater conditions in northern Baja, thinking ocean and freshwater ecosystems flow across political boundaries? Mark, you want to take a stab at that?
Sort of, maybe. I will tell you on the ocean acidification side that the modeling, which I did not put up there, but should be finished close to by now. They did add a segment to include the contribution from Mexico. And the California Current does go as far as around Ensenada. So that's only part of the equation there. But at least from the standpoint of looking at the issues in the entire Southern California Bight, that is part of the equation. Clearly, what's going on the border, I mean, man, this has been going on for 40 years as well, is that, and a lot of money is being allocated towards it. to the best of my knowledge, nobody's doing nutrient reduction at all. And just trying to get those plants to be able to operate for 300, the border plant, as well as rebuild the one, Punta Bandera, I think is the name of it, about 5 miles south of the border. Just getting those rebuilt so that they can operate 365 days a year and provide some level of treatment that's not that's reliable has really been the struggle, let alone getting to the point of like, oh, let's do advanced treatment and doing it for water recycling. Those conversations aren't even really happening at the point of funding really going to it in a major way. So water recycling potential down there is tremendous. And if there is more focus on water recycling, that's going to help water quality overall.
Thank you, Mark. Stefan, I think this next question is for you.
Okay.
Please explain the location of the replenishment basins and also explain whether there are overlaps between the basin replenishment by the Orange County Water District and WRD.
Sure. So the Montebello forebay is the primary location for our water replenishment in southern Los Angeles County. And those basins are up around the Pico Rivera area, just west of the 605. And those are the basins that we channel through the Whittier Narrows Dam. We channel the water coming out of the San Gabriel Mountains to those basins for infiltration. So while there's a political boundary between Los Angeles County and Orange County, underground, there's no boundary at all. So water flows back and forth across the boundaries. And we are in the process of modeling how the water is flowing on a typical basis between the Orange County and Los Angeles County areas. What we're finding now is that in certain times of the year, most of the water is flowing from Orange County to Los Angeles County. But because of the injection well that we just put at our Leo J. Vanderland's plant and the other injection that we're doing for seawater intrusion barriers, we're able to replenish some of the water down in that Long Beach area to kind of stem the tide of water flowing from Orange County to Los Angeles County.
Thank you, Stefan. We're getting close to the end of our time. I think I'll go back to Paul with a question. Paul, I think your challenges were pretty overwhelming. As I was listening, I think others felt the same way. I'm wondering what the worst case scenario is. Would there ever be a time where you would have to say we can't deliver water, or it'll be shut off for a day, or what's the worst case scenario? What do you have nightmares about?
I have nightmares about other things, but not that.
We won't go there.
It's hard to even say what a worst case scenario is, because I mentioned the crystal ball when I was talking. A lot of this is predictions, and we don't know which of these predictions. We can look in the past and see what predictions were made and see what is happening now and see which of those are coming true. But in terms of these impacts on water quality and on water resources, we don't know. We can't say for sure which ones are going to come true and which ones are going to act synergistically, and are we going to see the real swings in weather. But certainly some of it seems to be materializing. But would we ever get to a place, if we get to such a situation where we cannot deliver drinking water, then we've got much bigger problems because something else has happened. The city's washed away, so no. Treatment plants are robust. The treatment process is robust. We can and we have in the past made modifications. Not all utilities are going to be able to respond in the same way. Smaller treatment plants with less advanced treatment might not be able to handle things in the same way. And I can really only speak for Metropolitan. We do have ozone in each of our treatment plants, which is very good at handling many of the particular problems I was bringing up. So I think so long as we continue to adapt to, there are advanced treatments that can be added to existing treatment trains. I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where, no, we can't deliver water because climate change has impacted the water quality in such a way that we can't manage it. My bigger concern, like I say, we would have bigger problems if we're not delivering water. It's because the water treatment plant is washed away in a storm. It's not because of a water quality issue.
Okay, wonderful. One last question. Have you ever figured out of the water rates charged, what percent of that comes from water quality systems?
I can't answer that. I don't have an answer to that. I'm sure someone has, and I can find out for you, but I don't have those kind of numbers to hand.
That's all right. Okay, that's a hardball. Okay, thank you. I want to thank all our speakers. Paul, thank you so much, and Stefan and Mark. We're again apologize for the late start of our meeting. Please join us. Gary, I think you have the next screen to put up. Please join us in October on the 25th. We're going to be talking about what's at stake if diversions are ended from Mona Lake to Los Angeles. So we'll look forward to seeing you back then. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Good afternoon.